Hey, welcome back to our second installment on databases. So today we're going to be talking about how to create a table without legs, or in other words, working with Airtable. And unlike a physical table, Airtable is a database system or setup. And like we talked about last time, very similar to Google Sheets in terms of how the data is structured. And what we'll be discussing today is how to turn a table into a database. So how to connect information from one table to the next. So last time when we were covering the fields or the columns in a table, and it's very similar to Google Sheets and a format that many people are familiar with. But the idea of a database is that it's more encompassing than just taking some information and organizing it. So within our learning management, for example, let's talk about a few different data entities that we're going to be working with. So last time we created this users table with some basic information about a user. And within our learning management system, the users are going to be interacting with courses. And those courses may have lessons, it may have quiz content. There may be some additional um, status updates that we would want to make as well. But I'm going to go here and add a table. In Airtable, there's a couple of options for creating a separate table. So Omni is the AI-powered feature to help create the table. So I'm just going to say, let's create a courses table. So the naming convention that I'll often use when creating a table is plural because the idea of the table is that it's holding records of a specific type. So in this case, we have a single record would be a course, and the table itself would house courses. And so when you're thinking about tables, it's usually a singular entity that you want to be storing information about. And then what we can do with those singular entities is connect them to the other data entities. So in this case, the users are going to be connected to courses, and then lessons may be connected to courses as well. And the AI feature was really helpful in creating a few fields out of the box for us. So instructor name, user. So we'll talk about those fields in just a second. If you feel comfortable with the AI, like all AI services, if you know what you're doing, really good tool to speed things up. Otherwise, probably best to create it manually at this point. So with our courses, let's create one called AI Introduction. And it has a description. I'm just going to put some information in here right now. So it gave us a status and a category out of the box. We'll call it planned for now. So kind of helpful that we have this out of the gate. And then maybe we'll call this somewhat technical, right? It's an AI introduction course. Um, and then we also have instructor name and users. So instead of users, what we'd probably call this is students. We'll come to that in just a second. But with the instructor name, let's say that it was me, the instructor that we wanted to pull into the course. And oftentimes with a course, there may be other information that we would be displaying for the instructor. So there might be a profile, a link to some sort of contact information or a way to contact them. And so it's perfectly fine to have a text box here, but if we wanted to pull that additional information in, one of the mistakes that I've often seen when I'm working with people that are using databases and building out tables for the first time is they would create a new field for each one of those pieces of information. And so they might say like instructor contact number or instructor email. And the reason that's a mistake is with databases, one of the principles that we want to follow is to not duplicate data. And I guess a companion principle to that is we don't want fields that are consistently left blank. If they're left blank every once in a while, that's fine. But if they're consistently left blank, that means there might be a problem in our database architecture. So in this case, because we can store that information about the instructor on the user table. That's all information that typically is associated with a user. Like we have an email, we could add a phone number here. And so with that instructor information, maybe one thing that we could do is have like a user type here. So maybe we'll have a single select and then, or maybe we'll call it role. And then here we'll have a couple of options of student and instructor. And so with these role in the default, we'll just make an instructor. We'll create that role. And then in the courses table, what we're going to do is instead of having just text to have the instructor name, we're going to change this to link the tables together. And what that does um, in in Airtable, it's going to link the tables together. The term that you'll hear with databases is a foreign key. And the idea there is that every table should have a primary key. So this first field that you see in Airtable, they have it be fixed here on the left-hand side. And if I edit the field, you see that it says this is the table's primary field. So this is actually uh, similar to the idea of a primary key in a database, that it should be unique, and in the sense that each record should have a unique value for the primary key. And it's how it's going to be referenced when you're linking things between, or when you're linking two tables together. And so the primary key on one table becomes the foreign key if it's linked to another table. So to give you an idea of how that works, let's change this to a link to another record. And then we're going to link to users. And then there's a few different options here. Now that we're linking it to the users table to pull in that additional information, or to reference that record that has additional information, we're going to be changing this to from allowing linking to multiple records to just a single record. And the reason we're doing that is because with the instructor, we want to make sure that there's one primary instructor. So if there is teaching assistants or other people involved in the course, maybe that would be different. So that's a decision that often comes down to how you're deciding to architect your system. But in this case, we're just going to link to one record. And there's a few other uh, options that we have here in Airtable, but this is actually a principle with databases that you may hear as well. So if we only are linking to one table or one record in a table, that relationship is called one to many, because in this case, on this record, there can only be one instructor from the users table, but an instructor could have many courses. So the relationship between the course and the instructor is an instructor can have one course, a user or an instructor can have many courses. So that's why we have the one to many relationship. If we had this box checked here, then it would be a many to many relationship. So what's actually important here is when I change this to be a linked record, I'll go ahead and save it. And it says that I'm going to convert the field type, and so we'll say yes. A couple of things happen. One, it automatically found the record, and if I click on it, what you'll see is it pulls up the information from the users table, and it has this nice little indication that we're coming back to the users table here, or that it's linked to the users table. So we have the status, the email, all of the other information from that. But if we come back to the users table, you'll notice that there's a new field here, courses 3. And you see that we have that link to the AI introduction. So if I click on this field, this was created when I added that linked record field in the courses table. If I go ahead and edit it, the default is to allow to linking to multiple records. And so that's just something to note, that when you're creating those linked record fields, to ensure that you have that relationship down correctly. And we'll be talking more about it. So you have practice in creating those linked record fields and those relationships in the right way. But that's something that can be quickly overlooked if you're moving quickly. And I've made that mistake of not coming through and ensuring that it's set up appropriately. Um, so I will change this title to just make it more apparent of what it is. And so we'll call it created courses. And you'll notice that there's actually a couple other course fields. So we have this courses field here. Let me just delete this because it's a text field. But then we have this other courses field that is, if you notice this link to another record, if you hover over it, So there's actually a second link between the users and the courses field. So if I click on it and I edit it, it says it's linked to courses, and we could link to multiple records here as well. And if we come back to the courses table, if we look at the instructor's name, we see that second field that we had, the users table. And in this case, we have a link to users and allowing link to multiple records. This was created by the AI assistant that we had. And I think the AI assistant, the idea here was similar to a student, right? Within a course, students can sign up to take the course. And in this case, the many-to-many relationship uh, theoretically would make sense. Multiple students could sign up for a course, and a course could have multiple students at the same time. So the way that it's set up right now in practice would work and make a lot of sense. With typical databases, that many-to-many relationship that we're seeing here, where many students could sign up for the same course, and this a single course could have many students on it, or I should say, a student could sign up for multiple different courses, and then a course could have many students on it. In regular databases, that isn't feasible, and it's not advised to have a many-to-many relationship between tables. Airtable allows us to do that, and in certain instances, it's a good idea. The difference and a good framework to have in deciding whether to use a many-to-many field um, or a one-to-many is if the linked record needs to have metadata stored on it, then it should be split out into what's called a junction table. So in this case, students signing up for a course, there's additional things that we would want to store about that relationship. So it could be the student's grade on the course as they're taking it. It could be the date that they enrolled into the course. There's a number of other fields or piece of information that we want to store specifically on that relationship. So what we're going to do now is, instead of having a many-to-many relationship, I'm going to go ahead and delete this field. So I'll go ahead and delete it. And then you see, if I come back, what Airtable will do is it'll change it from a linked record to a text field. So just make sure, if you are cleaning up a linked record, you actually have to delete the field in both tables. And then what I'll do is I'll come back to courses, and actually I'm going to create a new table, and I'm going to call this table enrollments. And this is going to be our junction table between the users and the courses. So the first thing that I'm going to do after cleaning up this field here is I'm going to create a link to another record, and then I'll pull in the courses, and then I'll just call this the course. And what we want to do is only have one record, because what this junction table is doing is it's turning the many-to-many relationship into two separate relationships. And each of those relationships is going to be a one-to-many. And to illustrate that, the first one-to-many relationship is this course here, where there can only be one course on an enrollment. If you enroll in a course, it's for a specific course. And then the student is also a one-to-many relationship. So we'll pull up a link to another record, and we will pull this in as users, and we'll call this student. And so in this case, there's only a specific set of users that I want to pull in. So I probably should select some of these options to create a specific view. And the view is a way to filter records in a table. And with that view, I should create one that says student. So I'll create another one and call that student here. Or with this grid view, maybe I'll rename it to student. And then add a filter. And what I'll do is just have a couple of students here. And so that way, with this filter, we'll say the role is student, and this is a feature of Airtable that's really nice. That if we come to the enrollments now, when I'm selecting a student, it's only pulling up the students, and then I can do the same on the courses. If I come here and add a new view, and we'll call this a grid view, and we'll call this instructors. And on this instructor view, we're gonna do the same thing where we're gonna add a condition. We'll say that the role is instructor, uh, and let's just delete that really quick, and then make sure that this is an instructor, and we'll say filter role is instructor. And that with that, if I come back to the courses, I can set that as an option here where we limit it to a specific view, and we say instructors. And that way, if we create a new record, we're only pulling from the active instructors. So that's one way to enforce a limitation as you're using linked records. But what coming back to the idea of this junction table now, what we've done is we've created that relationship between the students and the courses that was many to many, and now we've enforced a one-to-many relationship. And what that also does is it allows us to store additional information. So in this case, maybe we'll do a single select and we'll call this grade. So with the course, maybe there's a grade that's associated with it, A minus, B plus, B minus, and we'll go to that point. So we can store additional information, whereas if we had that many-to-many relationship before, there was no way to say this was the grade for this specific student on this course. And so it makes it easier to track that additional information that we need to store. Also makes it easier to do things like analytics, dashboards, and then also filtering and sorting. So as we're going through building out this learning management system, and really as you're building any database, these are the main concepts that go with it, that you want to ensure that the columns are holding the right information, that each record has as much information filled out as possible, and that you're not duplicating information. So if you're saying um, instructor, or if we have the course name here in this table, that would be duplicating information. And instead of duplicating, we should use linked records. And the final one is that the data is what we would call normalized in that sense. So not duplicating information is having normalized data. Allows us to keep the data clean, allows us to run analytics, dashboards, reports in our interfaces, and then when we're doing roll-ups from one table to the next. So taking some information and aggregating it for a given student or a given course. And with these principles, that's the main ideas that you need to start building a database and to ensure that it's scalable. So as we go through, I'm going to add a few additional tables like lessons. So let's go ahead and build a lesson table to just get some practice. And as this is building out with the AI assistant here, let's have you think about what fields would go on the lesson and what's the relationship between the lesson and the rest of the database or the other tables that we have here. And somewhat interesting that we see because the AI assistant knows out of the box that we need to connect to a course. Let's see if it did it in the right way. Yep. So allow linking to multiple records. We see that that's unselected. A lesson can only be associated with a singular course. And then they included the instructor. So because we have the instructor on the course, this is actually a field that I'm going to delete because it violates the rule that we had just talked about of duplicating information. So we'll go ahead and delete that. And then there's some additional fields here. We also have enrollments and I'm actually going to delete that because this would be a good test question. How does the lesson relate to the enrollment? So I'll give you a second to think about that as I clean up the fields here. How does the lesson relate to the enrollment? So as you were thinking about that, hopefully, as you were uh, contemplating the lesson, the relationship between lessons and enrollments, there is a relationship, but it's not direct. And this is another concept that turns out to be fairly tricky with databases. Is with each of these entities that we're mapping with their data from a data standpoint with their properties, the lessons and the enrollments are related, but it's not a one-to-one relationship because an enrollment actually has its relationship with the course, and then the course has its relationship with the lesson. And so the idea of a lesson is similar to the idea of a course, where there should be something for the student to keep track of their progress in a lesson, and that should be tied to the enrollment, but not tied to the lesson specifically. So we're actually going to create another junction table between the lesson and the enrollment because it's actually three different junctions here where a specific student could be enrolled in a course and now taking multiple lessons in that enrollment. And so what we're going to do is we're going to split out that many to many to many relationship between a student, an enrollment, and a lesson, and create another table called lesson enrollments. And I'm going to do this manually because I don't trust the AI to do that. So we'll call this lesson enrollments. And with this lesson enrollment, what we have now is a linked record to a enrollment. So a lesson enrollment can only have one specific enrollment, and what that will do is it'll tie it to the course that's being taken. Similar to the lesson relationship with a course is one to many. A lesson can only have one course, but a course can have many lessons. An enrollment can have many lesson enrollments because what we're going to want to do is keep track of each lesson that's in the course for a given user. So that way, if there's multiple people enrolled in a course, each of them will be able to keep track of their own individual lessons. So let me go ahead and make a link to course enrollment here. And then we link to enrollments. And then we're going to have a link to the lesson. So we're going to link to another record, and then we'll link to the lesson. And now what that will do is it'll help us keep track of the progress. So if we wanted to inform the user of how far they've gotten within a lesson, maybe it's a quiz that they're taking on the lesson to show that they understand and they've completed the activities for a given lesson, they're ready to move on. We can now store that metadata about a specific student's instance of a lesson in their enrollment. So as you're building out databases, this is something that takes practice of understanding how the relationships are managed between different tables and how to set those up. But this idea of linked records and then taking that many-to-many relationship between linked records and turning it into one-to-many, a one-to-many or two one-to-many relationships will help keep your database organized and usable in a way that is understandable. And with this, there's sometimes there's not a right or wrong answer of how to do it and how to best approach it. And that's going to come down to experience and testing things out. So as you're building out your Airtable base, and as we're building out the learning management system together, be aware that it's not something that is right or wrong, black and white. There's no perfect database that's out there, and especially as you're thinking about the structure of how everything relates together, it takes time, and that's the beauty of Airtable is that we're able to do it quickly and to make updates and changes as you're going through. So it's not going to require SQL or understanding code to do it. We're just doing it within an interface. And so oftentimes what I'll do is build out, the bigger applications that I'm working on. I'll use Airtable to map out the relationships to start, instead of uh, going and trying to use a heavier tool like Postgres uh, or MySQL to map out these relationships, because it's much quicker to work in Airtable, much easier to see the relationships. And one of the things that we'll be talking about is how to map these relationships out so that they're visible, because once you get to 10, 15, 20 tables, hard to see all of the relationships in this single view. So more to come, and we'll have a few activities. If you haven't yet, please go to cerebral.com. You can find this database course within our courses. I'll have a link to it with the video. And if you do have any questions, the course has the community to answer those questions and to keep you going on with additional assignments, to reinforce your learning as you're going through and building out and learning Airtable or databases with Airtable. So thanks for joining today, and we'll see you on our next lesson.